CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The Qatar corruption scandal engulfing the European Parliament. MEPs vote to strip one of their vice presidents of her role.
Our other headlines, the boss of the collapsed Bitcoin exchange FTX charged with defrauding investors by the US. Sam Bankman-Fried says he didn't knowingly commit fraud.
UK rail passengers warned to stay at home as industrial action stalls the train network, with other strikes expected in the coming days.
Who'll be the winners in the business world next year? Why Nike and Google are poised for post-pandemic success.
And Argentina fans dream of their first World Cup trophy in 36 years, but the team will have to get past Croatia first. The European Parliament has voted to remove one of its vice presidents in what's been described as one of the biggest corruption scandals in the institution's history.
Lawmakers voted to strip Eva Kaili of all her roles during an emergency sitting in Strasbourg. She's one of 4 people linked to the European Parliament to be arrested and charged over allegations that the World Cup host Qatar bribed them with cash and gifts to influence decision-making. Kaili has denied any wrongdoing, as has Qatar. Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. Alex, an overwhelming majority voted to remove Eva Kaili, but she has not been found guilty of any crime.
Yeah, that's right. 625 MEPs voting to end her term in office, 1 voting against, 2 abstaining. I think that's about as overwhelming as it gets. But you're absolutely right. She's been arrested, she's been charged, but she hasn't been found guilty of anything. But this is just a message, very clear message the European Parliament is trying to send. The implication behind this vote is that they deem her to have been involved in some serious misconduct. And that is why they've decided to remove her, or to end her term as the Vice President of the European Parliament. This is in line with what Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament, said yesterday. She said European democracy is under attack. The European Parliament is under attack by third-party countries who want to infiltrate European NGOs and infiltrate the European Parliament and influence how decisions are made. So a very clear message from the European Parliament, among some criticism, saying, well, you can't just jump to a conclusion. You have to wait for the investigation to run its course and for the judicial system to continue with its due process. And that's one of the criticisms against that decision by the European Parliament. But then again, this is very much an internal matter, and the European Parliament can move in the way that it chooses. So a clear message sent from the European Parliament. But again, Eva Kaili, through a lawyer, denying any wrongdoing. Qatar also denying any wrongdoing, saying they were not involved in this corruption scandal at all, despite the fact that that is clearly the Gulf country that is linked to these allegations. Again, the raids, 20 raids conducted by Belgian authorities over the last few days, starting on Friday, including on residences and apartments where they found bags of cash, one with 600,000 euros, another one in Eva Kaili's Brussels apartment with 150,000 euros. And so that's quite a shocking discovery from the Belgian authorities. So this investigation is going to keep running its course, and the political fallout will keep rumbling on.
Alex, obviously this is part of an ongoing investigation. Can you talk us through the timetable in terms of due process? What does happen next?
Yeah, well, the 4 people who've been arrested and charged will be in a pre-trial hearing at Belgium's federal court in the Palace of Justice tomorrow morning, late tomorrow morning. That will happen behind closed doors with their defense teams and a single judge that will be presiding over the case. And this has been a very long-running investigation, 4 months in the making. The Belgian prosecutors saying that this has been a very long and thorough investigation. The timeline for what happens after that is really hard to tell. It's a bit of a how long's a piece of string situation, because it can take weeks, it can take months, because it'll be based on how prosecutors and defense attorneys will be working with each other and how that evolves. So we're not entirely clear how long it will take. But a pre-trial, that putting things in motion, that will happen tomorrow morning. That's on the legal side of it, and that will go only as fast as it goes. On the other hand, you've got the political fallout. You have 4 MEPs that have stood down from positions of responsibility in Brussels, say, not implying that there's any wrongdoing there or that they've been implicated in this corruption scandal, but they have been politically too close through some of their assistants having their offices sealed by the Belgian authorities, or being connected to that NGO which is at the centre of all this. So the judicial process will take weeks. That pre-trial is tomorrow morning. The political fallout will be instant and will last for quite a while.
EU institutions have historically sometimes been criticised for a lack of financial transparency, signing off, auditing and signing off accounts and the like. Your view on the reputational damage to the European Parliament of this particular chapter?
Well, look, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen earlier in the year did her State of the Union speech in the European Parliament. That is the big landmark speech every year that the Commission President gives to the legislature, making it clear what her vision is and what the State of the Union is. And she ended on saying we need to do more to fight corruption. So this has been very high up the agenda, and for it to land so close to home will be some serious questions. There's also the fact they were looking at European expansion into the Western Balkans, for example, and one of the requirements required of these the nations and countries aspiring to join the European Union is to sort out any corruption issues. That is something the Commission has been very clear on. That's something that's been an issue with Bulgaria, for example, in joining Schengen. There's been a lot of pressure from the Netherlands, for example, about corruption in Bulgaria. So there's a real a risk of being accused of a double standard there by European institutions. Now, that is the kind of broader Europe-wide reputational damage that they may face, but there's a real desire to move very fast to safeguard the institutions from that reputational damage and to weed out any bad actors that may be implicated in this. But, you know, very, very harsh words just this evening, a few moments ago, by the Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo. He said the Belgian authorities did what the European Parliament couldn't in this investigation. That is scathing criticism from a Prime Minister from quite a Europhile country. So that reputational damage is going to take some time to fix.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Alex Cadier in Brussels.
US stocks have opened sharply higher after inflation figures came in lower than forecast. That's made it more likely that the Federal Reserve could soften its aggressive stance on raising interest rates. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is at the New York Stock Exchange for us. So, John, this seems to be good news for US inflation.
Yes, I think so, Robin and Jamie, on the face of it, pretty much. We call it a downside surprise. That's what it is here. And it was very welcome as well, because inflation came in for the month of, November, very much cooler than had been anticipated and cooler than of late. Here are the numbers. Are you ready? So between October and November, inflation was up 0.1%. Very good. And year on year, it was up 7.1%. Now, a couple of things to say about that. Back in June, it was over 9%. So it's come down a lot since then. So that is very good. The problem is that although gas and energy are a lot cheaper, I'm afraid things like food and rent are still very elevated. And also, I have to say, 7% inflation for a lot of people is very much of a deal. They have to dig deeper in order to buy basic foods at 7%, stuff like that. Christmas presents, for example. So it's still very elevated and still not very good, but it is better than where we were. Now, the point about all this is that tomorrow is Wednesday, and at 19 hours GMT, the Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, which is meeting now and will meet again tomorrow morning, is going to make a decision on what to do about interest rates. And I think I told you on yesterday's program that Wall Street's been very uncertain about whether the December the 14th hike would be 50 basis points, which they were hoping for and anticipating, but it could also be 75. Well, this points to it being 50 basis points, so that's very good news. And the Dow just took off like a SpaceX rocket today. Literally, the futures markets around about 8:30 here, local time. The Dow was up 700 points. That's the futures, you understand. And then it was up for most of the morning, and indeed it is still up, but it's down, as it were. It's worth a lot less. Its increase is a lot less than it was earlier on. Let me give you the numbers then. The Dow up now 0.6%, NASDAQ 1%, S&P 500 just over 1%. The S&P is back above 4,000. The Dow is maintaining 34,000, and all the bond yields, fairly obviously, are lower. So, you know, I mean, a bit of good news. Let's take it while we can, eh?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the looming funding deadline where you are. Are we at a place where the US is going to run out of money on Friday?
Well, you know, far be it from me to knock back a story, but frankly, I doubt it. And I've been living in the US for 20 years now, and we do this every year, pretty much. If not every year, then every couple of years. And we did it last time in September, just in September, just gone. This was an issue, and they got away with it by, you know, basically doing something late at night, and it didn't get very much coverage, but the spending went on. The thing you have to understand about this is that this is a TV democracy, okay? And it's all about getting airtime for Republican and Democrat representatives and senators. That's really what this is. And this spending limit thing gives them a chance to get on telly, have their say, knock a few bricks out of the opposition, all that kind of stuff. Now, the US is one of the very few countries in the world, I think Denmark is the only other one, actually, which has this situation where the Congress has to vote in order to push further spending and debt and deficit and that sort of thing. Now, the Senate has come up with a stopgap bill, which it will bring in on Friday if needs be. I think the deadline is on Friday. The Senate can do that, and the leaders are telling everybody to stand by for a last-minute vote to get that through. That will give us another week to discuss things through till the following Friday, I think it is. And on the table is a wider, what they call omnibus bill, which will see the government through until September of 2023, next year. It's $1.5 trillion, though. The Republicans call it a spending bomb, and they don't like it. And the problem, as it were, at the moment is that they want to see more defense spending, while at the same time not increasing domestic spending, which they call fat and pork. So, you know, it is a story. It could happen. But I've got to tell you, we've been here many times before, and they'll find a way around it. Eventually, probably on Christmas Eve, frankly. That's what happens here. They leave it to the last second.
And John, tell us about the developments in the saga of the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange FTX.
Well, this is the big story of the day here. Now, FTX was a cryptocurrency exchange, so it's the place that you went with your dollars or your yen or your yuan or your euros or your sterling to convert it into cryptocurrency, basically. And the leader of that company was called Sam Bankman-Fried. And what's odd about him is that while other cryptocurrencies were struggling in the course of the last 12 months, and some of them going out of business, Bankman-Fried was wandering around D.C., handing out money left and right to the Democrats and going on massive spending sprees. He wears a dirty, stained T-shirt and shorts pretty much all the time. That may, of course, have been a clue that we didn't spot first time round. But anyway, the thing is, his company went under in November with a massive hold of $32 billion. $8 billion of client money has now gone missing. And Bankman-Fried was arrested last night in the Bahamas, where he has been holed up. There are all sorts of charges against him now from the most prolific prosecutor's office in New York, the Southern District of New York. The SEC, the leading regulator, calls it massive fraud. The Commodities Futures Trading Commission has accused him of fraud on all sorts of levels. Now, the House Financial Services Committee was due to hear from him today, but obviously that can't happen now because he's awaiting extradition. Had he spoken, he would have blamed his lawyers. We know that because his testimony has been published. Speaking now is John Ray, the new CEO, and his testimony is pretty damning. He says customer assets were commingled with the hedge fund that the company also run called Alameda. Alameda client funds were exposed unnecessarily to extraordinary risk, and they lost. And Bankman-Fried and his girlfriend went on a spending binge between 2021 and 2022, giving money to democratic causes and buying companies and buying property left and right. And we're learning just now that there was also a backdoor built into the algorithm which allowed them to get funds out without it being obviously noticed by anyone else. This story is going to be the big one of 2023. And here in America, he is known now as the mini Madoff, after Bernie Madoff, whose Ponzi scheme collapsed all those years ago, ruining the lives of millions of his customers.
John, thanks very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Well, let's stay with this story because FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried said he was driven to create this company so the money he made could be given away to good causes. Brian Mittendorf is Professor of Accounting at The Ohio State University. Brian, good to see you. Welcome. Well, giving away other people's money to good causes has gone spectacularly wrong here, hasn't it? I wonder how damaging this all might be to charitable giving.
Yes, thanks for having me. I think overall, this is one particular avenue of charitable giving, this effective altruism that Sam Bankman-Fried was in many ways the public face of, but not a big piece of charitable giving in general. But it does create an opportunity for these kind of emerging means of charitable giving, in particular this notion of effective altruism and crypto associated giving, for those to suffer, for sure.
I mean, obviously, giving money to good causes on the surface, well, that's a good thing and a good selling point, presumably, for a company, isn't it? Do we think that folks really do invest in companies because they like that warm feeling about the association of good causes?
I mean, that could be that companies engage in corporate philanthropy because it does help the bottom line. I think the unique aspect about Sam Bankman-Fried was that he essentially told the story that he was in this to generate resources, not for himself, but to give those resources back. And so to see it as not just a piece of the puzzle, but the entire reason for the company's existence is perhaps the unique part here. And it also, I guess, is what's now going to open it up to criticism of whether he was really serious about that.
It may sound a bit like a modern-day Robin Hood. It may sound a bit like altruism, but it's all, in the end, all about business, isn't it?
I think time will tell on that. Hindsight will be 2020 for sure, whether it was good intentions gone wrong or bad intentions from the start. I don't know that at this point. I think what we can say is that even if the intentions here were very good, this mentality of the most important thing is to generate resources for charity, as opposed to looking at both the means and the end to generating resources for charity, certainly should get more scrutiny.
How much do charities and good causes rely on donations from rich benefactors? Do we know?
I can speak. In the United States, it's becoming an increasing share of resources available for charitable giving are coming from a smaller and smaller group of people. What I think we don't know in this particular case is how much of it was hype and how much it was actual resources going to charity. In many ways, it looks like there's been a lot of promises, but not a whole lot that's gone to charity. But again, on that, I think time will tell once we know how much was, like I said, hype or pledges to charity as opposed to actual resources going to them. In terms of actual resources going to charity, I think you see a much more robust machinery in place of a variety of individuals and institutions that are donating to charity. So in terms of the overall impact on charitable giving, I don't think it's particularly notable here. What is notable, I think, is what it means for the trends in charitable giving.
Brian, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Brian Mittendorf, Professor of Accounting at the Ohio State University.
Thank you.
FTX's rival Binance has temporarily suspended withdrawals of the major stablecoin USDC after customers pulled over $2 billion worth of cryptocurrency from the exchange. Binance says it's because of a temporary shutdown of a bank in New York which supports its cryptocurrency swapping. Reuters reported that CEO Changpeng Zhao might have been under federal investigation for money laundering since 2018. He has dismissed the report.
The UK unemployment rate increased to 3.7% in the 3 months to October from 3.6% in the 3 months to September. This new data comes as the country faces its worst inflation in decades. The Bank of England looks set to raise interest rates for the 9th consecutive meeting on Thursday.
United Airlines has ordered 100 Boeing 787 Dreamliners with the option to buy 100 more in a deal estimated to be worth $43 billion. The US airline's investment in wide-bodied aircraft will enable it to replace older, less efficient models as it pushes for a post-pandemic expansion. The deal comes after US regulators gave Boeing the green light to resume 787 sales that were halted in 2021 after safety issues.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, international leaders gather in France to hear what Ukraine needs to survive this winter. We're in Paris next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
Ukraine's international allies are meeting in Paris to agree on a support package to help the country through the winter.
President Zelensky said over $800 million in aid was needed to prevent more energy blackouts.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Mark Webster, who's watching those talks in Paris. So, Mark, what, apart from that figure we mentioned, is Ukraine calling for?
Well, it was a pretty long shopping list that President Zelensky announced over a video link from Kiev. They want just about everything, from spare parts in order to repair the energy and water infrastructure, which has been badly damaged by Russian shelling, right the way through to medicines, clothes, food, just to help the Ukrainian people through what is a particularly brutal winter. Now, President Macron of France set the tone of this conference right at the start, because first of all he said he wanted to send a clear message from France and the 46 other countries which had senior representatives here in Paris, that they were absolutely united and solid behind the Ukrainian government, and that they would continue to supply as much as they could. Now, France kicked it all off by promising an additional $125 million of aid, which will cover issues like repairing transport infrastructure, as well as energy and water. Plus then the other countries chipped in, and they've managed to come up with a package of roughly $1 billion, which will be providing, to say, immediate aid. President Macron said it had to be immediately available because he wants to get it all there by March of next year, because this is the critical phase for Ukraine. Some 12 million people are without water, heat and light. 7 million houses have none. Now, he says, unless we do something about that as a matter of urgency, then people will die this winter of hypothermia.
And Mark, there have been warnings, haven't there, over a possible new wave of evacuees if Ukraine doesn't get the support it needs?
Absolutely, that's implicit in all of this. The Ukrainian government has tried to do something to try and protect their population over the winter. They put in place 5,000 warm areas, tents effectively, with a heater inside, where at least the population can go, warm up, charge their phones, which of course are critical in terms of communication within Ukraine at the moment. But they face a very hard, long winter ahead. And so, as I say, the message from this conference was certainly that the French finance minister said, whatever you destroy, we will build it again. And 700 French companies came to this conference this afternoon, and what they're looking at is contracts which will enable reconstruction. But President Macron also said, we cannot wait to rebuild Ukraine till the fighting stops. We have to be doing that now, or the humanitarian consequences will be absolutely dire. So they will feel that this conference has been hugely successful. The same President Zelensky joined my teleconference. His Prime Minister was actually here physically, and they're welcoming the assistance that's being given. The overwhelming message was, whatever problems Ukraine has, that there is no fatigue with the Ukrainian issue, and that they want the message to go out loud and clear. We will be there for you, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian population, to provide you with whatever humanitarian needs you've got through the winter. Undoubtedly, the subtext was they're also asking for weaponry, but today was very much more about people surviving this winter.
Mark Webster in Paris, thank you very much.
At least 2 people have been killed in Russian missile strikes across eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities say 5 others were injured in a series of attacks on the city of Kherson, while Russian ground troops claim to have regained control of around 20 villages around Donetsk. Ukraine has appealed to Western allies to supply longer-range missiles. Kyiv says that Moscow-backed troops are targeting infrastructure and civilian areas as winter weather conditions worsen. Well, one of Russia's key allies, Belarus, says that its troops are being inspected for combat readiness. The country's defense ministry says military forces are being moved to what it calls designated areas and will set up bridge crossings in western and eastern Belarus. Let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, what has Belarus said about this exercise?
Well, 2 things, actually. Earlier in the day, there was a press release, a short piece of text from the Ministry of Defence, which said that the President had ordered snap drills with exactly what you said there, a limited deployment to northwestern Belarus to try to test engineering equipment on 2 rivers. Since then, we've also had a video statement from the Ministry of Defence of Belarus, and it sounds like it's actually quite a lot larger in scale than the initial message. There are still no precise details, no information about how long these drills will take place, who is involved, and the number of troops involved, but it does also sound like it will be all operational parts of the Belarusian armed forces, and indeed 1 unit will be sent to the southern border of Ukraine. Previously it sounded like all of the drills were going to take place in the northwest, closer to Lithuania and Poland than southern Belarus. That's not to say that the Ukrainians are particularly concerned about any imminent mobilization from Belarus into Russia. It's something Alexander Lukashenko, the president, has repeatedly said he would not do. He said he's willing to defend Belarus, but not to fight against Ukraine. And also, Ukraine believes that Belarus simply doesn't have the manpower nor the capability to enter Ukraine from the north, as the Russians did earlier in the year. And so there's in terms of how this is being interpreted, there are a few things military analysts point to. They say it either genuinely is a set of drills for a very nervous Belarus, which is frequently making statements about the possibility of invasion from Poland or NATO, or it's more saber-rattling to try to make Ukrainian citizens uncomfortable, or alternatively, it's a distraction technique to keep the Ukrainian military on the front foot and move some to the north of Ukraine just in case. But so far, no indications that Belarus is imminently moving towards Ukraine. Having said that, there is very good NATO reconnaissance in the area, so if that did look likely, I think we could quickly expect a warning from NATO allies or Ukraine itself.
Stuart, just a word about Russia's currency. The ruble has fallen to a 6-month low. Is this in any way linked to the oil price cap?
Yeah, the last time it was this week, it was in May earlier in the year. So it is significantly weaker than it was. But compared to before the so-called special military operation, it's still 25% stronger. So by no means a disaster like we saw in March for the Russian ruble. Indeed, it is linked almost exclusively to the oil price cap. That's why it's getting worse and worse. It's for Russia, this means less export revenue is going to come in, either because of the lower price of oil or because it's exporting less oil. That means investors and also the central bank expects less money for Russia in foreign currency, and still the import problems have not been solved within Russia. It's still difficult to get goods in. So that's why it's weakening. There's also a little bit of uncertainty on Friday. The central bank, due to give its latest interest rate assessment. It's likely to stay the same, also due to uncertainty in the central bank minds about what exactly is going to happen going into the new years. So for Russia, less income expected, and that meaning the ruble is weakening. But no disaster for Russia. It's expected this going into 2023. It's accommodated this in its budget for 2023. So it's unlikely to have major economic impacts in terms of the planning aspect. But Russia will be making less money from oil next year. That's the assumption.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Making sure there's more of the natural world in 2030 than in 2020. Delegates at COP15 try and work out how to do it.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: the Qatar corruption scandal engulfing the European Parliament. MEPs vote to strip one of their vice presidents of her duties.
Boss of collapsed Bitcoin exchange FTX charged with defrauding investors by the US. Sam Bankman-Fried says he didn't knowingly commit fraud.
Train passengers across the UK are being warned to expect travel chaos as rail workers begin the first of 4 days of strikes.
A long-running dispute over pay and conditions has brought most of the network to a standstill.
Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following the story. Well, it's a pretty miserable day if you want to go anywhere, and more strikes planned after today.
Well, that's right. You mentioned 4 days this week. That's just this week. The rail workers are planning to strike pretty much non-stop right through January. There won't be the same kinds of strikes. Sometimes it'll be go slow. Sometimes it'll be starting later, finishing earlier. Sometimes it'll be bans on overtime. But there's going to be very precious few, if any, days without some kind of disruption between now and the beginning of January. So a lot of working days lost, and the numbers are already starting to inch up. For October this year, 417,000 days of work have been lost thus far. That's the most since November 2011. But from June till October this year, 1.2 million days lost. Now, that's the worst since April 1990. So this is shaping up to be what the press always love to try and describe as the winter of discontent. They might get it this time. Have a look at my report. Britain has been hit twice. First by the weather, which has severely disrupted life across the country, and now widespread strike action, which will do the same. The train stations are filling with passengers eager for good news and finding only bad. Union leaders have rejected pay offers so far, and so negotiations are all but broken down. And while the country grinds to a steady halt, the news from other negotiations is no better. The nurses are calling for the mediation service ACAS to get involved, but getting little response from ministers.
I have made it very clear that if they want to avert the strike on Thursday and on the 20th of December and moving forward, we needed to get into a room with myself to discuss pay or with conciliation through ACAS. I went into that room today with hopes, obviously, and came out with not one single brown penny.
The government position is so far resolute, saying they have taken advice and their offers are fair.
I would say what we've tried to do is to take the politics out of this by making sure that we have an independent pay review body. We've listened to that independent pay review body and we've honoured the settlement that they suggested.
Which means after 2 years of a pandemic which almost entirely shut the doors on family gatherings, the public face a similar fate for 2022. The government is considering new anti-strike legislation in the new year, but for now we'll be counting on the public losing patience with the workers before they lose faith in the politicians.
So, Andrew, where do these ongoing strikes leave the government?
Good question. I mean, some may say that the union leaders have picked a bad moment. The country's not in the mood for strikes, that's for sure. They've had 2 years of pandemic where they were locked down and unable to travel. Now, this Christmas, the same thing may happen again. So they may got their timing wrong, and that might be what the government is counting on, that the public will lose patience with them. But the response from the government thus far has been slightly interesting. The Prime Minister has fielded this off to his other ministers. Health Minister, Transport Minister, the one you saw in my report there, Oliver Dowden, the Minister without portfolio, they are fielding all the issues with the strikes. They are the ones appearing on television to talk about the strikes. Where was the Prime Minister today? He was announcing a new initiative that he is putting in his name to do with immigration and migrants coming into the country and a deal with Albania and 700 more staff being supplied to the border force to protect the shores from the boats coming across. Of course, the boats have stopped now. It's December, it's cold, they're not coming anymore. This will be a problem for the spring. Nonetheless, Downing Street has seen it necessary to put the Prime Minister at the front of this. And this is that's his first big policy. This is the moment where a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has to define himself. The public have to get an impression of what kind of leader he is likely to be. It may be that they've miscalculated. It may be that he should be earning his spurs, if you like, dealing with the strike action. But thus far, it seems to be running away without any government involvement. Both sides hoping that ultimately public opinion will go their way and they won't need to have that clash or have the arm wrestle to see who's on top of the policy.
OK, Andrew, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. Now, which are the companies to watch in the new year in 2023? Nike, Google and the pharmaceuticals giant Roche have topped the global polls for the firm's best place to prosper in the post-pandemic world.
The poll by the Swiss-based research institute IMD looked at the most valuable firms operating in technology, pharmaceuticals and retail. It examined their strategies for future-proofing in the fast-changing business environment. Well, Howard Yu is Professor of Management and Innovation at the IMD Business School in Denmark. Welcome back to the programme, Howard. Good to see you. Let's talk about pharmaceuticals first. And, of course, COVID vaccines saw those kind of companies do exceptionally well last year. What about this year?
Well, if you're looking at the pharmaceutical ranking, of course, companies that have mRNA technologies like AstraZeneca as well as Pfizer, they are on top of the league table. But it is just one of the expression of future capabilities. If you're looking at Roche, although they're not big in vaccine development, their capability around genomics and protein flow computational scientists is really on top of the game. This is why the top few companies is all about whether they could scale up this future capability ahead of competition.
So looking at your ranking, it's topped by tech companies, isn't it? But this is a sector that's had a particularly difficult year and seen a lot of changes.
That's right. Oh my God. I mean, this year we see tech companies all plunge, but still there are winners and there are those who hurt the most. If you're looking at the ranking, of course, Google and Microsoft particularly still stay on top because their product offering is much more diversified compared to Meta, which plunged, Netflix, which plunged, and Spotify that plunged. So the message for 2023, you have to diversify your product line. Unicorn is a one-trick pony these days.
And looking still at the technology sector, it's also had to deal with what you could call a tech war between China and the United States. How has that affected things?
Absolutely. So the third company is NVIDIA. But if you triangulate between NVIDIA and Microsoft, one unifying theme is the ability to win favor, both Washington as well as Beijing. Both of them do not pick sides. So I think going forward with all this geopolitics, technological decoupling, it is important for companies not to pick sides. You have to win both in order to become future ready.
And what about Nike? That's a company that's done well in your ranking, hasn't it? What does it do so well?
Right. Between Nike as well as Lululemon, historically they've been doing very well. And even in 2023 going forward, they still top our ranking. I think particularly they are so good in turning their brand into a cultural phenomenon. They leverage their digitization, they leverage opinion leaders. So these days in Instagram and TikTok economy, you have to be able to work with a key opinion leader across the world. And these two brands really stood out.
And across all sectors, I mean, it's been a very difficult economic climate this year, hasn't it? What lessons do you think companies can learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. You still need to rethink about what is that main thing around innovation you must persist. Of course, the recession is scary. You need to prioritize. You need to cut back to preserve cash. But here's the thing. Future-ready company always prioritize. What is that main thing? You would persist in innovation so that recession would come to an end, maybe in 2024. Then you're ready for the next wave of growth. By the way, being future-ready is also a source of resilience during crisis time.
Professor Howard, you from IMD Business School in Denmark. Good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
A 16-year-old boy from the Roma community has died a week after he was shot by the police in Greece. The shooting of the teenager in Thessaloniki led to days of protests. The boy was being pursued by the police over an alleged unpaid filling station bill when he was shot. A police officer has been arrested and faces criminal charges.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban government says 3 terrorists involved in an attack in the capital, Kabul, have been killed. On Monday, gunmen opened fire at a hotel popular with foreign visitors. The Islamic State terror group has claimed responsibility. Beijing says several Afghan police officers were killed and 5 Chinese nationals injured.
We would like to express our condolences to the military and police officers killed and to the injured. The Chinese embassy in Afghanistan has made stern representations to the interim government of Afghanistan, demanding the Afghan side spare no efforts in rescuing the injured, open a comprehensive investigation, bring the attackers to justice, and take further measures to protect the safety of Chinese citizens in Afghanistan.
Heavy rain has flooded the Portuguese capital, Lisbon. The mayor's office issued a red weather warning telling people to stay at home and avoid travelling. Public transport has been brought to a standstill. Local authorities have been criticised for failing to build the infrastructure needed to deal with flooding.
The clock is ticking in the desperate effort to save the world's endangered species. But world leaders and experts at COP15 in Canada are making slow progress on reaching an agreement.
Yeah, the delegates are now halfway through the Biodiversity Summit taking place in Montreal. Let's talk to our correspondent, Adise Tian-Chan, watching events for us. Adise, some criticism on the progress of this summit. Well, are they making any progress?
Well, certainly the timing is of essence here. We have just about an hour ago, we've had the mid-conference briefing here as we have reached the halfway mark here. Delegations from some 200 countries have been working on hundreds of pages of documents for nearly a week now, and what they have left is less than a week. So many officials we speak to here, and from the update we've heard earlier, they are saying that they are optimistic, as there have been lots of brackets the country's delegations have been able to agree on, but there's still so much more work to be done. This was the message sent to us both in yesterday's briefing on Monday as well as this morning by the head of the UN Convention on Biodiversity. Take a listen.
Overall, one will say good progress, but if you look at specifically the Global Biodiversity Framework negotiations, is still a bumpy road. I think we are still, hopefully, that by 19th midnight, there should be an agreement. We have no plans to extend beyond.
Especially when you speak to some of the UN officials here, you're really feeling the anxieties ramping up, because you can imagine that the items they were able to agree on so far are really the easiest ones they could. The most sort of contested issues, if you like, are the ones that are left behind. And they only have a couple more days here until the high-level delegations, ministers from several countries, arrive on the 15th. And for about 3 days, they're going to be working through some of the harder issues to agree on, and finally the 18th and the 19th will be the 2 final days. They will finally try to reach a historic agreement if they want to preserve the nature through 2030.
Adiz, thank you for that. Our correspondent Adiz Tianshan in Montreal.
Well, climate change is affecting the world in different ways. In some coastal communities, rising sea levels are having a devastating effect. From Mexico, our correspondent Frank Contreras reports.
The rising sea in Mexico's Gulf Coast is destroying this fishing village called El Bosque. The village is located in Mexico's Gulf Coast state of Tabasco, which receives heavy rain year-round. On one side of the village, we see the raging waters of the Gulf of Mexico. On the other side, there's the rising water from a massive delta where 3 powerful rivers merge.
Here you can see the devastation the rising sea has brought to this fishing village. This used to be a family's 2-story home.
Among a few dozen residents who remain is 77-year-old Antonio Mayoral. He's been living here for more than 35 years. Mayoral says the rising sea recently washed all the way up to his front door.
I once planted yucca, yams and other crops out there. It used to be land, now it's covered with water, and the water's edge has reached all the way here. It has swept away our houses. The water keeps coming.
A few other villagers have also decided to wait it out. The elementary school here used to sit nearly 500 meters from the edge of the sea. Now the rising waters regularly enter the classrooms. Several children whose families remain in the village have no school to attend. Professor Liliana Gama has spent decades studying the effects of global climate change on this region. She says increasingly intense and longer-lasting cold fronts make the sea rise.
It's like the hurricanes. The torrential rains and the ocean are heating up. So there are many factors that make these events increasingly powerful and long-lasting.
The intense waters of the Gulf of Mexico continue sweeping away parts of the shoreline. On the other side of the village, the rising delta prevents the villagers from fleeing. They are locked in and left waiting for help. Meantime, the water keeps coming, and the villagers are requesting that Tabasco's state government help them move to a safer place. Frank Contreras, CGTN, El Bosque, Mexico.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a potential last shot at World Cup glory for 2 of football's greatest players as Argentina play Croatia in the last form.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit.
no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
The story of the North Atlantic convoys and their heroic sailors has become part of British national identity. Less well known is that more than 1 in 7 of the merchant seamen who risked their lives crewing the convoys were Chinese, and that when the war ended, their loyal service was rewarded with betrayal.
If you could meet him now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd give him a big hug first and say, I'm sorry that this happened to you. We couldn't do anything about it.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Argentina play 2018 finalists Croatia for a place in the World Cup final later.
The match will see 2 of football's greatest players, Argentina captain Lionel Messi and Croatia skipper Luka Modric, face each other in what's likely to be their last chance to win international football's biggest prize before they retire. Our correspondent Dan Williams is in Doha. Dan, what's the atmosphere like there?
Yeah, anticipation very much building now ahead of this first of 2 semi-finals. Yeah, I can tell you that, about an hour or so ago, this place was awash with fans, Croatia and Argentinian fans coming together, singing songs, having a bit of banter. They've obviously all now, kick off just over 2 hours away, cleared off now to the stadium. It's not too far away now to the stadium, so it's mainly a lot more local people around here that will be watching the game at the various bars and cafes and the like that are around this square, Souk Waqif. I have to say that the atmosphere's changed somewhat over the last week or so. Obviously, at the beginning of this part of the tournament, you had like the 32 nations of fans all in one, essentially a city, all coming together and enjoying themselves, and it was pretty chaotic, it has to be said. We're now at the business end of things, so we're down to just the 4 teams of fans, and obviously a lot more locals, a lot more people kind of flying in as well for these hopefully last couple of games for most of the football fans from around the world. But certainly, yeah, you can guarantee that there's going to be a lot more Argentinian fans, supporters inside that stadium. A lot of local people here very much supporting Argentina, and of course a big reason for that is for Lionel Messi.
Dan, Argentina go into this match as favourites, but Croatia will also, I guess, fancy their chances of a second successive final.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as you mentioned in the build-up there, this really does pit Lionel Messi of Argentina up against Luka Modric of Croatia. They've met each other on the football pitch many, many times, of course. When Messi was at Barcelona, the El Clasico, the derby between Real Madrid and Barcelona, at least twice a year they would have gone up against each other. So they know each other inside and out, and there's no doubt it's going to be a very, very interesting tie between these two, and which one will go on to the final. There is, of course, as you said, so much build-up around Lionel Messi and whether this will be his final chance of winning that World Cup that he just never managed to achieve. He's won everything apart from that. But the coach, Argentina coach Lionel Scaloni, suggesting that this isn't potentially his last one. There might be a little more time to see a Lionel Messi at least in an Argentina shirt. But as far as Croatia is concerned, well, they're just such a hard team to beat. They've only won one game at this World Cup within normal time, within the 90 minutes. Their last two games going to penalties, beating both Japan and Brazil on penalties on both of those occasions. Very difficult to beat. They managed to absorb so much pressure. And their coach, Zlatko Dalic, well, he says that beating Argentina, that will be his biggest achievement as a coach. But he's just told his players to go out there and have some fun.
I tell the players to enjoy football because there's no success, no results if you don't enjoy your job. Each of us who does our job must enjoy it and must be happy in the job, and my players are. The players of the Croatian squad are happy. We train with great joy as well as in our preparations, meetings and matches. I will tell them to enjoy football.
Yeah, so Croatia, can they make it through to a second successive final? Will Argentina and Lionel Messi keep his dream alive? Certainly the second semi-final as well, France up against Morocco. That's also going to be really interesting, taking place tomorrow evening. And of course that will, whether we see Morocco continue with their dream run that we've seen so far, their fairy tale story, reaching the semi-final, first African team to do so, first Arabic-speaking nation to do so, and that one is also going to be a mouth-watering clash. But for now, of course, the focus all on whether Lionel Messi can keep his World Cup dream alive.
Dan, enjoy the game. Good to talk to you. Our correspondent Dan Williams in Doha.
China's national football team isn't at this year's World Cup, but that hasn't dampened enthusiasm for the tournament. Interest in football has grown significantly, and President Xi Jinping is keen to make China a footballing heavyweight, but there is a long way to go. The 2018 World Cup was extremely popular in China. Almost 660 million people watched the tournament, meaning that China alone made up over 18% of the global viewing figures. But despite having the world's largest population, China's men's team have only qualified for the World Cup once before, and that was in 2002, where they were knocked out without scoring a single goal. So on the international stage, China's favourite players usually play for other countries. Portugal captain Cristiano Ronaldo has been repeatedly voted as the most popular footballer in China. And a big problem is that there's currently no Chinese men's footballer playing in the top European leagues. The most recent, Wule, left Sevilla in August. When he made his debut for the Spanish club, 40 million people in China watched the match. But China's women's team are a lot more successful. They've won the Asian Cup a record 9 times, and next year's World Cup will be their 8th appearance. One way China's men's team could make a return to the World Cup is by hosting it. There are reports that the country is weighing up a bid for the 2030 or 2034 tournaments. If that happens, it will be a big step towards President Xi Jinping's 3 football wishes: to qualify, to host, and to eventually win the World Cup.
And finally, if you really can't get enough of football fever at the World Cup, you may be interested in this jumbo tournament. Elephants in Thailand, painted with the flags of the semi-finalists and other qualifying nations, held a friendly against school children. The game, held north of Bangkok, was staged to get children involved with football. It pitched might against speed, but was eventually declared a draw. There was some concern the Elephants might have an unfair advantage and use their trunks, but none received a red card.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps: Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.